Okay, so I wanted to quickly go over some examples of loops and how to use loops and array lists. So again, loops are used when you want to do something over and over. You want to do things repetitively. So they're used for repetitive tasks. And array lists are used to store multiple values of a specific data type. So if you want to store a list of integers or a list of strings, a list of a defined class, such as recipe or a list of recipes or a list of ingredients, etc. So this is how you can use array list, and so we're going to go over some examples with loops. So remember, there are a few types of loops that you're going to be going over in your zyBooks reading and activities. The first one is for loop. So a for loop is used when you know beforehand the number of iterations that you're going to have. So you know the number of times you're going to actually go through, iterate through the loop. So a while loop is used when you don't know beforehand the number of iterations. So for example, if you know that the user is always going to enter 5 ingredients, no matter what, they have to enter 5 ingredients, you can use a for loop for this because you know beforehand that you're going to iterate 5 times. However, if you want the user to decide how many ingredients they want to enter, so say they want to, say you want to prompt them within the loop to ask them if they want to enter another ingredient. So they could say yes, they could say no, they could say yes 5 times, they could say yes 3 times. You don't know how many ingredients they're going to want to enter. So in this case, you can use a while loop, and you'll continuously ask them if they want to enter another ingredient while they say yes, they want to enter an ingredient. And until they say no, they don't want to enter another ingredient, then you can break out of the loop. So this is how you can use while loops. So this is the difference between for loops and while loops. And then you have do while loops. So do while loops are used similar to while loops, and they're different in the fact that they will always go through at least one iteration. They're always going to get into the loop one time, the first time. And I'm going to do some examples to explain this. So say we want to count from 1 to 10 and display the output, the numbers 1 to 10. So let's do this using a for loop. So this is the syntax. We say for int counter, so this is our counter, equals 0. So we're initializing our counter to 0. Counter is less than equal to 10, and counter plus plus. So let's look at this. So let's start at 1. We're going to count from 1 to 10. Okay, so we have int counter equals 1. So we're defining an integer named counter. We're initializing it to 1. Put a semicolon, and now the next is the condition that's going to be checked at each iteration, right? So we're going to check to see, is counter now less than or equal to 10? Okay, and then the next piece is this counter plus plus. So remember, this counter plus plus means we're going to increment this counter integer by 1 at each iteration. So it's kind of the same thing as saying counter equals counter plus 1, right? We're incrementing by 1. So this is the syntax for a for loop. And then we need our curly brackets there. Okay, great. So now within the counter variable inside this loop is going to increment by 1 at each iteration. And it's going to continuously check, is counter less than or equal to 10? So we could do system.out.println counter. So this is going to actually print the value of counter at each iteration. So the first iteration, counter is equal to 1. So it's going to go into the loop. It's going to print 1. And then it's going to increment counter by 1. And now it's going to check, is counter less than or equal to 10? Yes, it's now 2. 2 is less than or equal to 10. So it's going to print it again. And it's going to go increment counter again to 3. Is 3 less than or equal to 10? Yes. So it's going to go into the loop again. It's going to go up to 4. Is 4 less than or equal to 10? Yes. So it's going to print 4. And it's going to continuously do this until it reaches 11. So once it reaches 11, it's going to check this condition. Is 11 less than or equal to 10? No. So it's not going to go into the loop. And it's not going to print 11. So let's run this and make sure we get what we expect. And there you go. It's printing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 as expected. So this is going through the loop 10 times and printing out the value for counter as it's incrementing. Okay, so this is a for loop. So let's do the same thing using a while loop. So I'm going to remove this. Okay, so a while loop is similar, except we need to add in a bit more control because we don't define the number of iterations within the while loop syntax. So the way a while loop works, we first create a counter variable outside of the loop. So we'll say int counter equal 1. Okay, now we're going to say while counter is less than or equal to 10, do something, and we're going to print the value for counter. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. So we initialize counter equal to 1, and now we have this while loop. So we're going to say while the counter variable is less than the value for counter is less than or equal to 10, go into the loop and execute whatever's inside the loop. So let's see what's going to happen here. So if counter is initially 1, it's going to check the condition. If the condition is true, is 1 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it's going to go in this loop. Now it's going to go back up to the top of the loop and say, okay, what's the new value for counter? So counter has not changed, right? It's still 1. So it's going to go in here and it's still going to be 1. And it's going to say, is 1 less than or equal to 10? Yes. And it's going to print 1. So you have to be careful with while loops because this can cause an infinite loop. It's going to continuously just stay in the loop forever because counter never changes, right? This condition is always going to be met. Counter is going to stay equal to 1, and it's always going to be less than or equal to 10 because 1 is always less than or equal to 10. So it's going to continuously print 1 forever. So what you have to do within a while loop when you have a counter like this is you have to make sure you increment the counter within the loop. So we're going to say counter plus plus. So remember, this is the same thing as saying counter equals counter plus 1, right? These two lines are the same thing. So we're going to remove this one. Okay, so now this is better. So now we're making sure that that counter is changing and incrementing at each iteration, right? So counter is 1, it checks the condition, it's less than or equal to 10. Okay, it goes into the loop, it prints 1, and now it increments counter to 2. Then it goes back up, it checks this condition, it's 2 less than or equal to 10. Yes, that's true. So it's going to print 2. Now it's going to increment counter to 3. And it's going to keep going until counter is 11. And it's going to check the condition, is counter is 11 less than or equal to 10? No. So it's going to break out the loop. It's going to stop executing whatever's inside the loop and just go to execute the remaining of the code. So let's run this to make sure we get what we expect. And there you go. So we run it and you can see it prints from 1 to 10. Okay, good. So one other loop that I want to go over is called a do while loop. So a do while loop is similar to a while loop but slightly different, and let me show you how. So this is the code for the syntax for a do while loop. So I'm going to leave the while loop there for a second, and I'm going to show you the do while loop down here. So let's comment this. We'll say this is a while loop, and down here this is a do while loop. Okay, so do while loop, this is the syntax for a do while loop. You say do something, and at the end you put the condition while counter is less than or equal to 10. And then you're going to do something inside. Let's still print out the value for counter. And before we go into this loop, let's set counter equal to 1. Because remember, at the top in this while loop, we're incrementing counter to eventually it's going to reach 11. We want to set it back to 1 before we execute the do while loop. So notice the difference between the while loop here and the do while loop here. In the do while loop, it's always going to go into the loop once, and it checks the condition at the end. So that's a key difference. So it's always going to get into the loop and print 1, and then it's going to check is 1 less than or equal to 10, and then it's going to increment counter. So let's make sure we do that. So let's increment counter plus plus. Okay. So it's going to continuously go through the loop as before, but the key difference here is that it goes into the loop once all the time. Okay, so this is important. So for example, for a menu, when you're continuously asking the user for something, you want to always ask them at least one time, right? You want to ask them the first time. So you're going to want to use a do while loop for this. You want to ask them, do you want to enter another ingredient, right? And then you check to see if they said yes. And if so, then you ask them the ingredient name and all the ingredient attributes, etc. If they say no, then you break out the loop. But you always ask them once. So do while is good because for a do while loop, you always go into the loop at least once the first time. So let me demonstrate this through an example. So in this case, what if I set counter equal to 11? Right? So in the very beginning, before this while loop, what if I set counter equal to 11? Okay, so this is going to first check the while condition. Is counter less than or equal to 10? So counter is equal to 11 at this point. So is 11 less than or equal to 10? No, it's greater than 10. So it's not going to go into this loop at all. And it's just going to continue executing the rest of the code. However, if we set the counter equal to 11 in a do while loop, before a do while loop, it's still going to go into this loop and then check to see if it's less than or equal to 10. So it's going to execute whatever's in the loop the first time, and then it's going to see that counter is greater than 10, and then it's going to break out the loop. So let's run this as an example. So you see that for the while loop here, it didn't print out anything. This 11 is actually from this do while loop, right? So it's going into this do while loop, printing 11, incrementing it to 12, and then it says 12 is not less than or equal to 10, and it breaks out the loop and continues the rest of the code. So that's the key difference between a while and a do while, right? So in your assignment, for this lab assignment for this week, you're going to be using a do while loop to create a menu that continuously asks the user to add a new ingredient. Okay, so quickly, the last thing I want to go over is array lists. So I want to go over that concept of an array list. So let's remove this. So an array list is an important data type within Java, and allows you to store multiple of a single data type. So like, for example, multiple integers, multiple strings, or multiple data type that you define, such as a recipe or ingredient object. So let's do an example. So the first thing you want to remember when you're working with array lists is that you import the array list package. So you can say import java.util.arraylist. Okay. So the second, so now that we have that imported, let's actually create a new array list. And so we're going to create an array list of integers, right, of numbers. So the syntax to do this is array list integer. So notice these brackets I'm using must be these brackets here, and inside you put the data type, right? So whether it's an integer or a string or whatever it may be, you want to put that within these brackets. So you say array list integer, and we're going to call so this is the name of the array list. We're going to call it numbers equals new array list, and again integer. And then we put these parentheses because this is the constructor, right? This is a constructor that has no inputs. So it's going to be an empty array list of integers. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now let's actually add values to the list. So to add, we use these functions that exist within an array list. So the first one I'm going to show you is the add function. So this is how you can actually add an integer to the array list. So let's say we wanted to add the number 5 to our array list, numbers. So we'll say numbers dot, and the method is add. And you can notice there's more information on the different methods that you can use that automatically pops up. And we're going to add the number 5. So this is adding 5 to index 0 of the array list. So the index of the array list starts at 0 and increments for each add call that you make. So every time you add a number, it's going to add it to the next index. So it starts at 0, then it's going to add it to index 1, then index 2, then index 3, then index 4, etc. So we were to add numbers, maybe let's add the number 10. So this is adding the number 10 to index 1. Okay, so now we have an array list of two numbers, 5 and 10, 5 being at index 0 and 10 being at index 1. Let's add one more number. Numbers.add, let's say 21. Okay, so we've added 3 numbers to our array list of numbers. Okay, so now this is how we can add numbers. So how do we actually get numbers? So say we wanted to display the number at the second index, at index 1, right? So index 0, index 1, index 2. We want to display the number that's stored at index 1. So to do this, we could say system.out.println numbers, and the function to get the value, the number at a specific index is .get. And it takes in an integer, this integer being the index. So we want to get the number at index 1. So remember, let's comment this. We're storing 5 at index 0, storing 10 at index 1, storing 21 at index 2. Okay, so this is what we did. So now we want to actually print out the number that's stored at index 1. So we're using the .get function, .get method, right? And we're passing in the index as the input. So the index is 1. So what do we expect? Well, the value stored at index 1, remember, is 10. So we expect this to output 10. So let's run this. And there you go. You see it outputted 10. Okay, so say you wanted to output the value at index 0. System.out.println numbers.get the value at index 0. And we expect it to be 5. Let's run it, and there you go. So we printed out the index at 1, or the value at index 1, and the value at index 0, 5. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you is what if you wanted to set the value at a specific index. So say we wanted to change the value at index 1 from 10 to 30. So to do this, we can use the set method. So we'll say numbers.set. So we specify the index first and then the value that we want to set at that index. So we want to set index 1, right? We want to set index 1 to 30. So the set method takes in 2 inputs, the first input being the index that you want to set the value for, and then the value that you actually want to set at that index. So at index 1, we want to put the value, the number 30. Okay, so now if we were to output the value at index 1, initially it should be 10 at first, right? But then after we set it to 30, we should see that output the value at index 1 to be 30. So let's output the value at index 1. Okay, so we expect this to now output 30 because we set index 1 to be 30 at this line. So here the value is still 10, index 0 is 5, Index 1 is 21, but we're not printing that. I'm sorry, index 2 is 21. We're not printing that. And then we're going to set the index, the value at index 1 to 30. Then we're going to print again the value at index 1. So we should now see that to be 30. So let's run this. And there you go. So the value at index 1 initially was 10. And then the value at index 0 is 5. Then we set the value at index 1 to be 30. And then we print out the value at index 1 again. And you can see that now it's 30. Okay, and one last point I want to make. So I did include the integer type here. It's actually not required. I put it there for clarity so you understand kind of the concept, but you actually don't need this redundant integer. If you state it here and leave this blank, these just brackets without the data type within them, that is also fine, and it'll still work as expected. Okay, so I hope this is all clear. Again, just to recap, we talked about loops, for loops, while loops, do while loops, and array lists. So for loops are used when you know beforehand the number of iterations that are going to run. While loops are used when you do not know beforehand the number of iterations that are going to run. And then we talked about array lists and how to add values to the array list, set the values at specific indices, and also how to retrieve or get a value at a specific index. Okay, so you're going to be using all these concepts in your assignments this week. So in Stepping Stone Lab 4, you'll be using loops to ask the user if they want to enter another ingredient name, and you'll be storing each ingredient name that they enter into an array list of strings. Okay, and you will be using a do-while loop to do this. And then you're going to use a for loop to actually display or print out the name of each ingredient that is in the array list. Okay, so I hope this all makes sense, and as usual, please reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.